The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Central Military Academy's main briefing hall, casting harsh shadows across the assembled recruits. Commander Vextel limped to the front of the room, his cybernetic leg clicking against the polished floor with each step. The fresh-faced soldiers before him couldn't hide their stares at his battle-scarred appearance. Vextel's purple scales were crisscrossed with white scars, each one telling a story of close calls and desperate fights. His left arm, replaced from the elbow down with military-grade cybernetics, gleamed dully under the lights. The plasma burns along his neck were particularly noticeable, giving his voice a rough, gravelly quality that commanded attention. "Look at me," he said, gesturing to his scarred body. "Really look. This is what 4 years of fighting humans does to you, if you're lucky enough to survive." The recruits shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Most had never seen combat, let alone faced the legendary human forces that had terrorized the galaxy. "During the war, I know what you're thinking," Vexel continued, his yellow eyes scanning the room. "You've heard the stories. Human ships that could outrun our fastest interceptors. Weapons that could punch through our shields like paper. Technology that seemed almost magical." He paused at the holographic display in the center of the room, activating it with a thought. Images of massive human warships appeared, their sleek designs bristling with weapons. But that's not what made them dangerous. Any species can build better guns or faster ships. What made humans different was something else entirely. A young Colonian recruit near the front raised his hand. "Sir, my instructor said humans were just another warrior species. Aggressive, yes, but nothing we couldn't handle." Vexel's laugh was bitter. "Your instructors never faced them in battle, did they? Never watched a human ship ram itself into a battlecruiser 3 times its size just to create an opening for their allies? Never saw a human soldier fight for 6 hours straight, with a shattered leg and internal bleeding?" The commander moved closer to the recruits, his presence filling the room. "I was there at the siege of Kepler Station. I watched 300 humans hold off 15,000 of our troops for 8 months. 8 months. Not because they had better weapons or stronger defenses, but because they simply refused to give up." He activated another hologram, showing a space station surrounded by debris and Colonian ships. The station commander was a human named Hansel, just a mining supervisor before the war. No formal military training, no advanced tactical knowledge. But when we demanded surrender, he looked at our massive fleet and sent back a message that still gives me nightmares. The recruits leaned forward, captivated despite themselves. He said, "Come and take it," just for words. But the way he said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, was like listening to someone who had already accepted death but planned to make it as expensive as possible. Vexel's cybernetic hand clenched into a fist. "We thought it would be over in days. How wrong we were." Hansel turned every civilian into a soldier. Children were running ammunition while their parents manned the weapons. Engineers rigged mining equipment into explosives. Medical staff became snipers. A female recruit spoke up, her voice shaky. But surely they had to surrender eventually. With no supplies, no reinforcements. "That's what we thought too," Vexel replied. "But humans don't think like us. When their food ran out, they rationed what little they had and kept fighting. When their power failed, they fought in complete darkness. When their weapons broke, they made new ones from scrap metal and industrial chemicals." The commanders. The voice grew quieter, more haunted. "I remember the day we finally breached their defenses. We expected to find broken, defeated people ready to surrender. Instead, we found Hansel and 30 survivors still at their positions, still shooting, still fighting. The man had been wounded 6 times, was burning with fever, and looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. But his eyes were still full of fire." The hologram shifted to show intercepts of human communications during the siege. Even through the static and translation errors, the determination in the voices was unmistakable. "What I realized that day," Vextel said, his voice barely above a whisper, "was that we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting something far more dangerous. We were fighting people who believed their cause was worth dying for." He looked around the room at the young faces staring back at him. Every species in the galaxy fights for survival, for territory, for resources, but humans. They fight for ideas, for people they've never met, for principles they can't even touch. The commander deactivated the hologram and stood in silence for a moment. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. That's what made them so terrifying. Not their weapons or their ships or their tactics. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat when they believed they were fighting for something greater than themselves. And that, young soldiers, is why the war ended not with our victory, but with a treaty that recognized human space as sovereign territory. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the Academy's life support systems. Vexthal's eyes grew distant as he activated the tactical display, showing a three-dimensional model of mining station. Omega 7. The structure looked pitiful compared to the massive Colonian war fleet surrounding it, like a small rock surrounded by hungry predators. "Look at this station," he said, pointing with his cybernetic finger. "Standard civilian mining platform. No shields, no heavy weapons, no military defenses. Just industrial equipment and living quarters for the workers and their families." Hologram rotated slowly, revealing the station's simple construction. It was basically a large central hub with mining arms extending outward like the legs of a metal spider. It had 15,000 soldiers, 12 battle cruisers, and enough firepower to crack a moon. Humans had maybe 50 security guards, with basic plasma rifles and a bunch of miners with tool belts. Vexthal's voice carried a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Any sane species would have surrendered immediately. A young recruit raised her hand. "Why didn't you just destroy the station from orbit, sir?" "We needed the mining equipment intact," Vextal explained. Omega 7 was processing rare minerals essential for our war effort. High Command wanted the facility captured, not destroyed. So we had to do this the hard way. The commander walked closer to the display, his mechanical leg whirring softly. "When our fleet arrived, I was commanding a boarding party on the cruiser Thunder's Edge. We expected this to be a quick operation, demand surrender. Secure the facility, process the civilians." He touched the hologram, zooming in on the station's command center. "That's when we first encountered Hansel. Former Human Defense Force, served in the Centauri campaigns before retiring to civilian life. Just wanted to run a mining operation and provide for his community." The display shifted to show communication logs from that first contact. Static-filled voices echoed through the briefing room. "I still remember his voice perfectly," Vextal said. "Calm, steady, almost polite," when Fleet Commander Zargoth demanded immediate surrender. Hansal took exactly 3 seconds to respond. "Just for words. Come and take it." The recruits exchanged nervous glances. There was something chilling about the casual confidence in those intercepted words. "We thought he was bluffing," Vextal continued. "What could a bunch of miners do? Against professional soldiers? So we sent in the first wave, 500 troops through the main docking bay. Easy insertion, overwhelming force. The tactical display showed the Colonian assault plan, with neat arrows indicating troop movements. And objectives. It looked textbook perfect. The humans let us dock without resistance. Our soldiers entered the station expecting frightened civilians. Instead, they walked into a nightmare. Vextal's scarred face tightened. Hansel had turned the entire station into a maze of death traps. The hologram flickered, showing the aftermath of that first assault. Twisted metal, scorch marks, and debris filled the corridors. Mining charges rigged as proximity explosives. Industrial lasers repositioned as defensive weapons. Even the life support systems had been weaponized. They could flood entire sections with toxic gas, or drain the atmosphere at will. A recruit leaned forward, fascinated despite the horror. "How many casualties did you take?" 347 soldiers in the first 6 hours, Vextal said quietly. "More than half our initial assault force. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing that Hansel had organized every single person on that station into a fighting unit." The display showed personnel records of the station's inhabitants. Families, workers, even elderly retirees, all marked as active combatants. Dr. Minjay, the station's chief medical officer, became their head sniper. She was picking off our soldiers from impossible angles using a modified mining laser. Engineer Dongwu turned the ventilation system into a weapons delivery network. Even the cafeteria staff were manufacturing explosives from cleaning supplies. Vextel activated a new section of the hologram, showing the station's internal structure. Over time, watch this. This is how the humans adapted their defenses over the 8th siege. The display showed the station's layout changing day by day. Corridors were blocked, new passages cut through walls, entire sections reconfigured for defense. Every time we adapted our tactics, they changed theirs. When we started using heavy armor, they switched to acid-based weapons that could eat through our suits. When we brought in flame units, they flooded those sections and electrified the water. A young Colonian soldier spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. "Sir, what about the children?" Surely they didn't use children as soldiers. Vextel's expression grew even darker. That's what we told ourselves too. But desperate humans don't think like other species. Kids as young as 12 were running ammunition, maintaining equipment, even serving as lookouts and messengers through vents too small for adults. The commander paused, lost in memory. I'll never forget this one kid. Couldn't have been more. Then 14. Cornered her in the mining control room. Thought we'd finally caught a civilian we could question safely. She looked right at me with these fierce eyes and triggered a demolition charge that brought down half the sector. Took out 30 of our troops and herself rather than be captured. The recruits sat in stunned silence. This wasn't the clean, tactical warfare they'd studied in their manuals. By month 4, we were losing soldiers faster than we could replace them, Vexel continued. Our supply lines were constantly under attack. The humans had somehow jury-rigged mining drones to work as suicide bombers. They'd send these things out to ram our support ships. The tactical display showed the expanding debris field around. The station, as the siege dragged on, wrecked Colonian vessels drifted among the asteroids, testament to human ingenuity and determination. The final assault took place on day 243. We had to bring in our best shock troops, the Void Reapers, elite soldiers who had never failed a mission. Vextel's cybernetic hand traced the route of that final assault on the hologram. We blasted through the outer hull, cut our way through. 6 defensive layers fought corridor by corridor to the command center. The humans made us pay for every meter. His voice grew quiet, almost reverent. When we finally breached the last barricade, we found Hansel at his command station. Been shot multiple times, had shrapnel in his chest, and looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. But he was still coordinating the defense, still calling out orders to his people. The commander stopped speaking for a moment, remembering that final confrontation. There were maybe 30 humans left by then, all wounded, all exhausted, but none of them had given up. Hansel looked at me with these eyes full of absolute defiance and reached for his sidearm one last time. We had to stun him unconscious to stop him from fighting. The hologram faded, leaving the recruits in contemplative silence. That's what I learned at Omega 7, Vextel said finally. Humans don't fight like other species. They don't calculate odds or preserve forces for future battles. When they decide something is worth defending, they'll fight until their last breath. And that makes them the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Kronos Prime in all its terrifying glory. Fortress World hung in space like a metallic death trap, bristling with weapons, platforms, and defensive satellites. Massive orbital cannons pointed outward like the spines of some ancient beast. While patrol ships moved in carefully planned formations around the planet, "This is Kronos Prime," Vexel said, his voice heavy with memory. "The most heavily defended prison world in our entire empire. 24 orbital defense platforms, each one capable of destroying a battleship with a single shot. The 7th Fleet, our most elite naval force, stationed permanently in the system." The recruit stared at the display in awe. The sheer scale of the defenses was overwhelming. Energy shields shimmered around key installations, and the surface of the planet was covered with anti-aircraft batteries and fortress complexes. The prison facility itself was built into the planet's core, Vextel continued, zooming the display deeper. Surrounded by 50 kilometers of solid rock and defended by automated security systems that could kill an intruder in 1,000 different ways. We held the galaxy's most dangerous prisoners there. War criminals, terrorist leaders, enemy commanders. He paused, manipulating the hologram to show 3 specific cells deep within the complex. Among them were 3 humans captured during the Battle of New Sol. Commander Jahuan of the Human Defense Force, Dr. Su Jin, who had been developing new shield technologies, and Lieutenant Kung Ho, a special forces operative who knew the locations of hidden human bases. A young recruit raised her hand nervously. Sir, how valuable were these prisoners to the humans? Vextel's scarred face showed a grim smile. Valuable enough that they sent Captain Myung and the Soul's Pride to get them back. A display shifted to show a sleek human vessel emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the Chronos system. Compared to the massive Colonian fleet, it looked like a minnow swimming into a school of sharks. The Soul's Pride was a modified heavy cruiser, Vextel explained. Fast, well-armed, but nowhere near powerful enough to fight an entire fleet. Captain Myung had 200 crew members, volunteers all, because everyone knew this was a suicide mission. The commander activated a recorded communication from that day. Myung's voice filled the briefing room, calm and determined despite the impossible odds she faced. Colonian Fleet, this is Captain Myung of the Soul's Pride. We are here for our people. You can stand aside, or you can try to stop us. Either way, we're going home with our crew. Several recruits shifted uncomfortably. There was something chilling about the matter-of-fact way she had spoken, as if taking on an entire fleet was just another day's work. Fleet Admiral Corthan gave the standard response. Vextel continued, immediate surrender or face destruction. Myung's reply was to cut communications and begin her attack run. The holographic display came alive with the tactical recreation of the battle. The Soul's Pride dove toward the planet, dodging massive energy beams and missile volleys that lit up space like deadly fireworks. What happened next defied every rule of space combat we knew, Vextel said, his voice filled with grudging admiration. Instead of trying to fight the fleet directly, Myung used Kronos Prime's own magnetic field against us. The display showed the human ship's erratic course as it spiraled toward the planet, seemingly out of control. The planet's magnetic field was incredibly strong due to its metallic core. Our sensors couldn't get a clean lock on anything that got too close to the surface. Myung used this blind spot to hide her ship's true intentions. A recruit leaned forward, fascinated.
And what was she planning, sir? What? Something no sane commander would ever attempt, Vextel replied.
She was going to ram her ship directly into state. The prison complex. The tactical display showed the Soul's Pride's final approach, its hull glowing red-hot from atmospheric friction as it plunged toward the planet's surface. The crash was spectacular, Vextel said quietly. The ship hit the prison facility like a meteor, punching through 50 meters of reinforced concrete and steel. The explosion could be seen from orbit. He paused, remembering the shockwave that had rattled even the orbital platforms. We thought that was the end of it. No one could have survived that impact, but humans don't die as easily as other species. The display shifted to show the interior of the ruined prison complex. Emergency lights flickered through smoke and debris, revealing figures moving through the wreckage.
Ow.
Myung had somehow survived the crash, so had about half her crew, 100 people who shouldn't have been alive, but were somehow still fighting. They had minutes before our security forces arrived, and they used every second. Vextel's cybernetic hand gestured to the hologram, showing the human assault team moving through the facility with ruthless efficiency. I was commanding the prison's security response, he admitted. I watched through our surveillance systems as Myung led her people through corridors filled with toxic smoke and falling debris. She had a piece of metal shrapnel sticking out. Of her chest and her left arm was clearly broken, but she was still giving orders, still coordinating the rescue. The display showed security footage of the humans fighting their way deeper into the prison. They moved like ghosts through the smoke, using improvised weapons and their own ship's wreckage as cover. They reached the high-security cells in under 20 minutes, Vextol continued. 20 minutes to fight through automated defenses that had taken our engineers years to design. Dr. Sujin was unconscious from her injuries, so Myung carried her personally while her team provided cover. A recruit spoke up, his voice filled with disbelief. How did they plan to escape? Their ship was destroyed. Vexel's expression grew even more grim. Didn't have a plan. That's what made them so dangerous. They improvised. The holographic display showed the humans commandeering Colonian vehicles and equipment as they fought their way back to the surface. When their predetermined extraction point was destroyed by our reinforcements, Myung's team stole a squadron. Of our own atmospheric fighters, these were aircraft designed for Colonian physiology. The controls weren't even shaped for human hands. The display tracked 3 stolen fighters as they lifted off from the burning prison complex, pursued by dozens of Colonian interceptors. What followed was the most insane piece of flying I've ever seen, Vexel said, his voice filled with awe. Myung personally piloted one of the fighters through the Kronos asteroid field, a maze of space debris that our best pilots avoided, even in perfect conditions. The tactical display showed the twisting, impossible flight path as the human fighters weaved between asteroids. Using the massive rocks as cover from pursuing missiles, she was flying a damaged alien. Aircraft through a debris field while carrying wounded prisoners and being chased by half our fighter wing, Vextel continued. Any rational being would have surrendered. Instead, she used the asteroid's gravitational pull to slingshot her way to the system's edge. The commander's voice grew quiet as he reached the end of the story. All 3 prisoners made it to the rendezvous point where a human stealth ship was waiting. Commander Jaewon, Dr. Sujin, and Lieutenant Kyunho were successfully extracted. Of the 200 humans who started that mission, 37 made it home alive. He paused, letting the cost of the mission sink in. Myung wasn't among the survivors. Her fighter had taken too much damage during the escape. She stayed behind, drawing our pursuit away from the others, ensuring they could reach safety. Last transmission was to her surviving crew. Tell Earth we kept our promise. No one gets left behind. The holographic display faded, leaving the recruits in contemplative silence. The scale of sacrifice they had just witnessed was almost impossible to comprehend. That's what you need to understand about humans, Vexel said finally. They don't calculate acceptable losses or weigh strategic advantages. When one of their own is in danger, they'll risk everything to bring them home. And that kind of loyalty makes them the most dangerous enemy you'll ever face. The briefing room fell into an oppressive silence as Vexel's cybernetic fingers traced along his neck scars. His yellow eyes grew distant, lost in memories that clearly still tormented him after all these years. Kepler's Gate, he whispered, the name carrying weight like a curse. The most strategically important hyperspace junction in human space. Control that gate, and you control access to 12 star systems, including the routes to Earth itself. The holographic display materialized above them, showing a massive space station positioned at the intersection of swirling hyperspace corridors. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, with docking bays that could accommodate entire fleets. I was serving as communications officer aboard the dreadnought Void's Hammer, Vexel continued, his voice growing stronger. As he fell into the rhythm of the story, our Grand Fleet 800 ships, the largest armada ever assembled, was moving to capture the gate and open the path to Earth. The display shifted to show the overwhelming scale of the Colonian fleet. Massive battleships stretched across space like a dark cloud, their weapons bristling with enough firepower to crack planets. The humans knew we were coming. They'd pulled back most of their forces to defend Earth itself, leaving only a skeleton crew to hold the gate. Vextel's mechanical hand clenched. 43 ships. That's all they had. 43 ships against our 800. A young recruit's voice cracked as she spoke. Sir, why didn't they just abandon the position? Those odds? Because they were human, Vexil replied simply. And Admiral Tejo was commanding the defense. The holographic display focused on a single human vessel, a battle-scarred heavy cruiser that looked tiny compared to the Colonian armada approaching. It, the Indomitable, was Tejo's flagship. 50 years old, patched and repaired so many times it was more welds than original hull. But it had never retreated from a battle, and neither had its commander. Vextel activated his personal recording device. In the briefing room filled with the crackling static of intercepted communications from that terrible day, this was the moment when our fleet commander demanded their surrender, he explained. Listen to how Admiral Tejo responded. The recording played, and a calm human voice filled the chamber. Colonian fleet. This is Admiral Tejo of the Human Defense Force. You want passage through this gate? You'll have to go through us first. I promise you we'll make it cost more than you're willing to pay. Several recruits shifted uncomfortably. There was something unsettling about the quiet confidence in that human voice, facing impossible odds with such steady resolve. Fleet Commander Gorthel gave them one final chance to surrender. Vextel continued. Tejo's response was to open fire with every weapon he had. The tactical display came alive with the battle recreation. Streams of plasma, fire, and missile. Volleys lit up space as the tiny human fleet engaged the massive Colonian armada. What followed was the most brutal 18 hours of combat I've ever witnessed, Vextel said, his voice heavy with old trauma. The humans fought like cornered animals, but with a tactical brilliance that turned their desperate defense into something approaching art. The display showed the human ships using the gate's complex structure as cover, darting between the massive support struts and energy conduits like deadly fish in a mechanical reef. Tejo had positioned his ships perfectly. He couldn't use our numerical advantage because the gate's architecture forced us to attack in small groups. Every approach was covered by overlapping fields of fire. The hologram tracked the battles. Progression as Colonian ships advanced and were systematically destroyed or disabled by the desperate human defenders. Captain Sumin, of the cruiser Busan, rammed her ship into one of our battleships when her weapons failed. The explosion took out 3 more of our vessels. Commander Ginwu used his destroyer's reactor as a bomb, detonating it in the middle of our fighter formation. Vextel's voice grew quieter as he described the mounting casualties on both sides. But the humans were dying too. One by one, their ships fell silent. The Sol went down fighting 5 enemy cruisers at once. The Daegu held off an entire squadron before her hull finally gave way. The tactical display showed the human formation. Shrinking as the battle progressed, their ships forming an ever-tighter defensive perimeter around the gate itself. By hour 12, only 6 human ships remained operational. By hour 15, it was down to 3. And still, they kept fighting. A recruit raised his hand, his voice barely a whisper. Sir, what were they fighting for? They had to know they couldn't win. Vextel activated another recording, this one from late in the battle. Admiral Tejo's voice came through, strained but unbroken. All ships, this is Admiral Tejo. I know you're tired. No, we're running out of options. Earth's command reports the evacuation fleets have reached the outer colonies. Every minute. We hold here as another 1,000 lives saved. Response from his remaining captains was immediate and unwavering. Understood, Admiral. The Inchin will hold position, Guangzhou here. We're not going anywhere. Olsen reporting, let them come. Vextel stopped the recording and looked around the room at the stunned faces of his recruits. They weren't fighting to win, he explained. They were fighting to buy time. Every hour they held the gate was another hour for human civilian populations to evacuate deeper into their territory. The display showed the final phase of the battle. The indomitable Tejo's flagship stood alone against the remaining Colonian forces. Its hull breached in dozens of places, atmosphere streaming from the wounds like blood. In the end, it was just the indomitable against our entire fleet, Vextel continued. We had lost nearly 200 ships to their 43, but we still had overwhelming numbers. Tejo's ship was a floating wreck, most of his crew dead or dying. The commander's cybernetic hand trembled slightly as he continued. I was monitoring their internal communications when we finally boarded the flagship. The ship was dying around them, life support failing, fires burning out of control, the reactor core approaching critical overload. He paused, collecting himself. Before continuing, we found Admiral Tejo on the bridge, barely conscious from blood loss, with shrapnel wounds across his chest. His command staff was dead, his weapon systems were offline, but he was still there, still trying to manually target our ships. Vextel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. When our boarding party reached the bridge, Tejo looked up at us with these eyes full of absolute defiance. He activated the ship's self-destruct sequence and smiled. 18 hours, he said. We held for 18 hours. That's long enough. The holographic display showed the final moments, the Indomitable's reactor core overloading. The massive explosion that took out the boarding party and damaged several more Colonian ships. His last transmission was to Earth. Command, Vextel said, his voice heavy with respect. The gate is held. Tell our families we kept our promise. The evacuation routes are secure. The briefing room was completely silent, except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Several recruits were visibly shaken by what they had heard. We took Kepler's gate, Vexel concluded. Cost was so high that High Command questioned whether the victory was worth it. 200 ships lost, thousands of our best soldiers dead, all to defeat 43 human vessels. He looked around the room at his young audience. That's when I understood the true nature of human warfare. They don't fight to conquer or to dominate. They fight to protect. And when a human decides something is worth protecting, they become the most dangerous force in the universe. The hologram faded, leaving the recruits to contemplate the terrible price of that victory and the courage of the humans who had paid it. The air in the briefing room felt thick and heavy as Vextel S. Words settled over the assembled recruits like a dark cloud. Many of the young soldiers stared at their hands or the floor, unable to meet their commander's gaze. The holographic displays had faded, but the images of human sacrifice and determination seemed to linger in the air around them. Vextel studied their faces carefully, noting the fear and confusion in their eyes. These were the same expressions he had seen in veteran soldiers after their first encounters with human forces, the look of beings who had discovered that everything they thought they knew about warfare was wrong. Look at me, he commanded, his voice cutting through the silence. All of you, look at me and understand what I'm about to tell you. Slowly, reluctantly, the recruits raised their heads to meet his scarred gaze. Every military academy in the galaxy teaches the same basic principles, Vextel continued, beginning to pace in front of them. Preserve your forces. Calculate acceptable losses. Retreat when the tactical situation becomes unfavorable. Fight smart, not hard. He stopped pacing and turned to face them directly. Humans throw all of that out the airlock. They fight with their hearts instead of their heads. They make decisions based on principles that can't be measured or quantified, and that makes them absolutely terrifying to face in battle. A young Colonian near the back raised his hand tentatively. Sir, if humans are so dangerous, how did we manage to fight them for 4 years? How did any of us survive? Vextel's laugh was bitter and harsh. Survive? Look around this room. How many of your instructors are veterans of the Terran campaign? How many senior officers do you see with combat experience against human forces? The recruits exchanged nervous glances, now that he mentioned it. Most of their instructors were either very young or very old, either too inexperienced to have served in the war, or too senior to have been on the front lines. I'll tell you why, Vexel continued. Because most of us didn't survive. The casualty rates in units that fought humans were astronomical. Not because their weapons were better, but because they fought like every battle was their last. Activated a personal holopad displaying casualty statistics from the war. The numbers were staggering. Entire battalions wiped out. Fleets reduced to scattered survivors. Whole armies that simply ceased to exist after encountering human resistance. The 47th Assault Division gone. The Crimson Fleet destroyed. The elite guard corps disbanded due to insufficient personnel. His voice grew quieter with each unit he named. These weren't defeats in the traditional sense. They were encounters with an enemy that refused to follow the rules of war. A female recruit spoke up, her voice shaking. Sir, how do you fight an enemy that doesn't care about dying? Vexel fixed her with his intense gaze. That's the question that kept our high command awake at night for 4 years. How do you defeat an enemy that measures victory not in territory gained or resources captured, but in principles upheld and lives protected? He moved closer to the group, his cybernetic leg clicking against the floor with each step. Let me tell you about the psychology of human warfare, he said. We fight because we have to, because we're ordered to. because our survival depends on it. Humans fight because they choose to, because they believe in something greater than themselves. The commander activated another holographic display, this one showing intercepted human communications from throughout the war. Messages between soldiers, letters to families, final transmissions from dying ships.
Oh, yes, it is.
He said, playing a recording from a human soldier's personal log. My name is Corporal Sung Ho, Human Defense Force. If anyone finds this recording, tell my family I was proud to serve. Tell them we held the line at Firebase Delta for 6 days against impossible odds. Well, tell them we never gave up. The voice was young, tired, but filled with quiet pride despite the desperate circumstances. Or this one, Vexel continued, switching to another recording. This is Captain Hyjin aboard the cruiser Daijin. We're surrounded, outnumbered, and our engines are failing. But we're not running. There are civilian transports behind us, and we're going to buy them the time they need to escape. He played several more recordings, each one telling the same story, humans choosing to fight hopeless battles for the sake of others. Do you understand now? Bextel asked, his voice intense. Every human soldier we faced was fighting for someone else, for their families, for their friends, for people they'd never met but felt responsible to protect. A recruit near the front spoke up. But sir, how did the war end? If humans were so determined to fight, how did we achieve peace? Vextel was quiet for a long moment, his scarred face thoughtful. The war ended because our leaders finally understood something that should have been obvious from the beginning, he said slowly. You cannot defeat an enemy that refuses to be defeated. You can kill their soldiers, destroy their ships, occupy their worlds, but you cannot break their will to resist. He gestured to the tactical displays still showing the aftermath of various battles. After 4 years of fighting, we had managed to push deep into human space. We held dozens of their worlds, controlled key shipping lanes, and had surrounded Earth itself. By every traditional measure, we were winning. The commander's expression grew grim. But our casualties were mounting faster than we could replace them. Our supply lines were under constant attack. Human resistance movements were turning every occupied world into a battlefield. And most importantly, our own soldiers were beginning to question whether the war was worth the cost. He activated a final holographic display showing the final months of the war, the gradual withdrawal of colonial forces, the peace negotiations, the treaty that ended the conflict. High Command made a strategic decision, Vextel continued. They realized that even if we could defeat the human military, we would never defeat the human spirit. Every world we occupied would require a permanent garrison. Every human we conquered would become a potential rebel. The cost of victory would be greater than the value of the prize. The recruits sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. So we negotiated, Vextel said simply. We returned their worlds, recognized their territorial claims, and signed a non-aggression pact. Not because we couldn't win, but because winning would have destroyed us in the process. A young soldier near the back spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Sir, what happens if we have to fight them again someday? Vexel's cybernetic hand clenched into a fist. Then we better hope we're fighting alongside them instead of against them, because the galaxy has never seen a more dangerous ally or a more implacable enemy. He moved toward the exit, then paused at the doorway. Remember the names I've told you today, he said without turning around. Han Sol, who turned a mining station into a fortress. Mi-young, who sacrificed everything to save 3 prisoners. Admiral Taeho, who held the line against impossible. Odds, these aren't just war stories, they're warnings. His voice grew quiet, almost reverent. They're reminders that somewhere in this galaxy, there's a species that values honor above survival, principles above pragmatism, and the lives of others above their own. And that makes them the most dangerous force the universe has ever known. With that, he walked out, leaving the recruits alone with their thoughts and the weight of everything they had learned. In the silence that followed, the young soldiers sat motionless, processing the terrifying truth about humanity. These weren't the clean, tactical victories they had studied in their textbooks. These were stories of a species that fought with their souls as much as their weapons. One recruit finally spoke. his voice filled with awe and fear. No wonder the war ended in a treaty. I can't imagine trying to fight an enemy like that. Another nodded grimly. I hope our children never have to find out what it's like. The stories of human courage and sacrifice would be retold countless times in the years that followed, spreading throughout the colonial military and beyond. They served as both inspiration and warning, reminders that in a galaxy full of dangerous species, none were more feared than those who fought not for conquest or glory, but for love. The legend of human warfare had been born not from their technology or their numbers, but from their absolute refusal to surrender what they believed in, and that legend would ensure that humanity's enemies would think twice before challenging them again. For in the end, the most dangerous weapon in the universe wasn't a plasma cannon or a nuclear warhead. It was a human being who had decided that something was worth dying for. The END.